Hello, hello, hello. Yes. Good noon, everybody. Thank you for postponing your lunch and joining this session. I'm going to talk a bit about onboarding users and how, once they are onboarded, how they can securely access your applications or websites. Maybe first a quick question for the audience: who's using "It's Me" in the audience? You don't because you're you're from France, but it's since we have It's Me, it's a very interesting application because that makes onboarding and authentication to websites very easy and very smooth. But even here in this audience, you see that not everybody has strong authentication using It's Me. So you also need some other methods of authenticating users, and that's what I'm going to talk about: the difference of authentication methods, of onboarding methods for applications. So let's start maybe with the problem for online onboarding. First of all, if you want to online onboard a user, basically what you want to know is you want to know who that user is, who is accessing your website. The first issue with that is the way it usually happens is people have to fill in quite a lot of forms, fields, your name, your email address, quite a lot of information that they have to give, giving their identity, trying to say who they are, which is annoying and where you will, as a company, lose quite a lot of customers already in that first stage because it's just too much hassle to identify those users. The second part is that if you really want to know who that user is, imagine if you don't have something like It's Me. What happened in the past was that you need to send your electricity bill or a proof or your telco bill or something to prove that you are that identity. And that's actually where you're asking people to send some information which has nothing to do with your business, and people are reluctant to send that information, especially now in these cases of in these times of GDPR and privacy and so on. Then there's usually also a manual process to verify that that user is actually who he claims to be. And in that period, especially in these days, you will lose those customers. And the worst thing is that if you make a mistake in validating that user, if he claims to be one and he's not that same person, who's going to be liable for that case? On the second part, beside all the user issues, there's also the issues of hackers. Hackers are getting credentials from other companies. Maybe even if your information is very secure, they can succeed in accessing data from other services that are hacked. Dark web is full with these accounts where they can get all that information, or they can just go through social media and find some additional information of that users. With AI, what we see as well now is that people, if you're asking for official documents, AI makes it possible to swap the pictures of that user or the information of that user on the fly during the onboarding process, making it very difficult to identify that user. And even if you're using biometrics like Face ID, I don't know if anybody saw Mission Impossible, where you had those masks put on. That really exists in the real world. Hackers are using that, but today it's becoming much more easier with AI again that can replace that visual of that user live during a session, even a live session where it's very hard to identify that as a user. So these are all the issues that we have. So the second thing is that what I wanted to talk about is if you want to identify a user, what are the requirements? What are the different solutions? Now it will depend a lot on the type of company that you are. Or the services that you provide. You might need less or more information. And there's a second thing where one of the requirements, it's a bit of a fight between, on the one hand, we have the KYC process, because you want to know and you want to be for certain who that user is. So you need all that personal information. But on the other hand, you also need to be careful about GDPR and it's all over the world, those privacy acts that you need to comply with to do that. So you need to be careful there. What information you ask, do you store that information, and so on. You need to have some very good policies about those. So if we look at the options, different options for user onboarding, let's maybe start with the first one. That's the most easy one, can be used in commercial activities or something where you really need to have a lightweight process to onboard users. It's a manual process. It works all the time, that's the advantage. But please, you can only use it in low risk environments, like if nobody really cares about that identity. The main advantage is that you have 100% reach because everybody can fill in a document, but you're not certain who that user is. That assurance level is really low, and it's really not hacker proof. You see all the this fair is a lot about hackers being accessing different applications. If you use a username and a password as your onboarding process, that's really not the safest method. The second method is using federated applications. Federated applications can be an AD or something where your users are already residing. So what you will do is you will authenticate that user towards a third party or your own internal AD, or maybe social login using Facebook, X, what have you, to use that information from that user. It's ideal for B2B environments. For B2C environments, especially if you're in marketing, that's ideal, working with Facebook, Instagram as a login, because that's where you can get that information from that user, but still the validity of that user is very low. The third one is using the mobile IDs. That's the It's Me's, the Spits. Every European country has a couple, at least one, maybe a couple of those different mobile identity providers that they work together, sometimes with the government, but at least they ensure you that that user is who he claims to be. So the identity of that user is verified. It's ideal in B2B and B2C components, and that depends a bit on the country. I know for It's Me, it's very easy to use that one as onboarding. There are some other countries, some other applications making it a bit more difficult, but in general, the onboarding is pretty easy. The downside of that is the cost, because there always is a pretty large cost, especially in B2C environments implicated in this. And it's also regional, it's very regional. So you have It's Me in Belgium, okay, they're expanding outside. You have to use Eden in Netherlands, Bank ID in Sweden. So if you're targeting a broad international audience, you need to implement quite a lot of those IDs. And then it depends also, depending on which mobile ID that you're using, how certain you are about the proof of that identity and how well that is protected. Some you can use, for example, for authentication as well later, but that's not available for every single one of them. And then the last step is really using a document verification, where you take a picture of your ID card. The ID card has a picture of you as a person, you match it with your Face ID, and then that data is validated. The advantage, it can be used in B2C and B2B environments, and especially in countries where there's no mobile ID, like in the UK, for example, or in Germany. That's the main part of onboarding users. If you need to really know who that user is, if you want to have the KYC of that user. Technology depends a bit on which vendor that you're using with, but the data there, it has about between 85% of success rate of validating that user. I'm sorry, about 85% of reach, but every customer can use that. For example, we have a project where we are working with Bank ID in Sweden. Bank ID is one of the most implemented ID solutions in Sweden. They have 99.5% of the population, but it's only the Swedish population. So if you're a foreigner, you cannot use Bank ID, so you need another process. So with this customer, we're still they're still using 10% using document verification to get the full customer onboarding. So it's always a nice to have or a nice add-on on top of the mobile ID. And like I said, yeah, the onboarding experience, it's 85% of successful onboarding. So it doesn't always have it's not as easy as the mobile ID solutions. But if you compare those two, so mobile ID will definitely be faster. In some cases, it can be used as an authentication as well, where the document verification, you don't want to go through that process. It takes, depending on what you need, 15 seconds to 1 minute to do an onboarding, so you don't want to use that as an authentication solution. The main advantage is that you can literally access any user worldwide, because everybody that you want to interact has at least a passport or an ID card which you can verify. Both are very secure, and the level of trust depends a bit on the country that you're using. Because if you take, for example, it's me. You can do the onboarding through your bank, which means that the data that you receive is coming from the bank at the moment that the bank has issued those credentials. So if you change address, it could be that in It's Me, for example, the address is no longer the address that you're actually using. That's one of the main advantages of the document verification. It is on the document, that information, and that information is at least the legal information that you have as a citizen. Most mobile IDs only work with on mobile phones, meaning that you need to have your mobile phone, whereas for document verification, there are other solutions where you can use a webcam or something to do that onboarding. So you can also, again, have a bigger reach there. Oh. What are some additional benefits of document verification? It's the proof of possession. Suppose you're a lease company, car lease company, you need to have a driver license to rent that car. What you could do then is build in your application this document verification, and at the moment that you want to use the car, that you still ask to scan your driver license to see if that user still has at that moment his driver license. Because if you do it only on the onboarding process and you start renting a car, maybe in the meantime you had a fee or whatever, that you don't have a valid driver license. So that's one example. Matching the user with the card, that's also something that can be used not only for official documents, but also company cards, or like those badges that you use on. You can use document verification to match it with, for example, your company card, where you have a picture of that as well. You can have a lot of additional checks. Sanction list is that can you do actual business, depending on the region that you are. You can use it on the mobile phone, but also for kiosks and something. And also, if you want to re-onboard a customer, that document verification, if you did it on the onboarding, means that you have the picture of that user, and rather than sending an SMS or an email to do the re-onboarding of that user in case he lost his phone or whatever, you can use that picture to validate it's exactly the same user. That makes also the re-onboarding process or the reinstallation process of an authenticator much more secure using document verification. So very quickly about what we do with TrustBuilder. We have integrations with all those federated identity solutions like Facebook, Google, Apple, and so on. We support all mobile ID providers, but we also have the document verification all in one application. The advantage is that you then can, with that one solution, do the orchestration, and depending on the use case, the country, or the user, he can choose whichever method that he wants to use, making it easy to onboard that application. Now, we were talking now about onboarding. And onboarding is typically about identifying a user. And I know, especially here in Belgium with It's Me, it's a bit confusing because you're using It's Me both for onboarding and also for authentication, because that's a solution that they also offer, but that's not always the same possibility. So what are the differences and the advantages of using a separate authenticator compared to one that is your mobile ID application? So the information that you give is always updated every time with every login. If you're using a mobile ID, you see that when you log on with It's Me towards an application, every time it asks, do you want to share this kind of application? That means if you say, no, I don't want to share that application, that information anymore, you don't have access to the application. With a simple authentication, a pure authentication solution, that doesn't have to be the case. Once you know who that user is, he just is going to authenticate, just has to type in his PIN, and he's on the application itself. The installation, it's the advantage of mobile ID is that they usually already have that application. With the authenticator, it needs to be happening separately. The advantage is you can use SDKs or something. If you have a mobile app, you can integrate that in your mobile app, so making the process there very smoothly as well. The security really depends on the mobile ID provider. For example, Eden in the Netherlands is available through a username and password. So it's not always similar to what we're using here or what we're used to here. Whereas with an authentication, you know, of course, that you're always using MFA to access those users. For marketing and for UX perspective, the mobile ID always redirects you to their application, meaning that you get out of your application and there's always a possibility that you will lose the user at that moment in time. Whereas within the authentication part, it's completely integrated within your own application, so you can control the whole user journey of that user within that application. And the last one, support and guidance. The support, if something is going wrong, you don't know whether it's with mobile ID, whether it's your application or it's maybe the authenticator app, the mobile ID that is functioning. Whereas with if you have your own authenticator, you are fully in control yourself. What do we have with TrustBuilder on authentication? So we have our own applications as a mobile application, as a web application, or a desktop application. So you can completely integrate it in your mobile app, but also in your browser. And then as the last one, we offer also orchestration between different authentication methods. If you want to go to bring your own authenticator type of solutions, where you allow the customer to choose how he wants to authenticate. You're completely in control depending on the environment and the application that you want to give access to. So how does that work? If you would integrate both our solutions on the document verification, including then the MFA, it's a pretty straightforward process. So on a mobile application, the user will just go to your application, sign up. He needs to scan the document, take a picture, like he's probably used to. Then take a selfie. You have to do some face movement to see if it's a live picture, and also to counterfeit the AI attacks against the facial replacement. Then optionally we can do all the checks, the security checks, the KYC checks, and so on. And in the next step, he needs to set his PIN. His PIN is for the MFA, and automatically that will be enrolled behind the scenes. The user will not define anything. He can then activate the biometrics of his device, so he doesn't need to use that PIN anymore, and then he has access to the application. Next time that he wants to access the application, he just opens the application, uses his Face ID, and in the backend, the whole MFA process happens automatically, and you get access to the application itself. This is the mobile solution, and we have identically the same flow for a web-only application. And you can start mixing and matching both of them, meaning that you can give the same user experience for all your application. Some use cases I'll go. I don't know how far I am in time. I still have some time. Okay. Some of those use cases which we encounter. Can you still hear me? No? Better? Yeah. Some of the use cases, so especially in banks, governments, where you really want to know that ID. If there's a mobile ID available already, then it's fine, you can use that one. Otherwise, especially like in Germany, in the UK, you can use the document verification for that onboarding process. There's a whole KYC process also involved, which is also necessary. And then you have the liveliness checks to see if that user matches that authentication. And then adding the MFA, make sure that you are in control of, and that you comply with PSD2 and all these type of requirements. Another use case that we see is with consultants, where consultants need to access their customer's application. Consultants or third-party vendors. What we see there is that customers don't always have, or the customers of those consultants don't always know if a consultant is still working for that company or not. So how do we solve this? What we do is we're using the federated identity, so the second part of that user. So every time that he wants to log on, or at least the first time that he wants to log on, we're going to check that user in the AD, not or we're not going to create them in the AD of the customer, but he's going to check it with the third-party AD immediately to check if his password and everything is still okay. And we can do that every time or just once. It depends a bit on the use case. The advantage is that if you do it every time, that means that if that user no longer works for that company, next time that he wants to log on, he will still need to do that authentication, and then at least the company will say this user is no longer working for us anymore. So you can block the access at that moment. Because what we see with those companies is that they do the onboarding process, and that's a very rigorous process, which often takes a very long time. This is the first thing that we can reduce by automatically linking it towards the AD. But more importantly, if the user leaves, and it's often forgotten to mention that to the customer, that user no longer works for you, and by doing this process, he will no longer be in the AD of the partner, so he'll no longer get access towards your application. For commercial activities, what we advise there is doing especially the progressive profiling. Start as low as possible, social ID or something in commercial activities with the Instagram accounts or whatever to get some onboarding of that user. And then once they want to purchase something, that's when you start to ask for more information where you can implement additional checks and balances for that user. The advantage of if you want to make sure that user returns to you, if it's like an activity that where you want to purchase or sell often to that user, it's an advantage to use that authentication for that user as well, because instead of having to remember username or password, he just needs to remember his PIN or use his facial ID to log on to that application, and that will always work. Family subscriptions, that's where we see where, if for example, a parent or something in let's say in insurance, it's one person who has as the main account, and then he wants to subscribe his third parties. That's also where his wife, kids, whatever. That's where we see where the first user there. That's where the onboarding process needs to be very rigid, and you want to be certain that that user is who he claims to be. But for the second one, you can lower the process, just asking them to use the ID of the kids to scan and start connecting these identities also to that same account, making the one parent the main account holder, who is then who can delegate the third party, the other family members for their users. Very quickly, okay, on the last part on who TrustBuilder is. If you want to know more, we're right across this theater. You can have some drinks afterwards if you're not too hungry as well. So who are we? We're a French-Belgian company. We exist since 2008. We have about 500 customers located in 19 different countries. So we're focusing really on that innovation and making sure that we can provide a very good UX towards our customers, making sure that whatever flow that they have in mind for their application or their experience to their users, that can be automatically integrated. 500 customers, a bit in every sector. So on that part, we really need to focus. You really need to see, or we can really provide the exact use case that you need in every kind of sector that you are working in. Three main solutions. One is MFA. So the MFA use case is everything regarding the access, and then what this presentation was about mainly is on the identity, knowing who that customer is, making sure that we can verify that user, and then combining, of course, the three together, making a full solution of everything. We're a European company. It's a SaaS platform, but it's based in Europe. So also we're one of the only solutions there that has a full European solution hosted in European data centers and so on. And these are then the different. So I was just talking about the first part, the onboarding, and then the MFA. but we do the whole rest of the user flow as well, making sure that if a user wants to come to your application, that we can give the right access after that we know who that user is, making sure that we can work with fine-grained authorization as well for those customers, doing some risk detections, and based on policies, giving the right access to the right persons at the right moment in time. And that was just in time. Still some time for questions. If there are any, usually not. If not, thank you all for listening. And there are some, like I said, some drinks and cocktails available at our booth. Thank you.